I hope you enjoy this audio presentation, and that it will help lighten your pathway in life. Please feel free to share this audio with loved ones and friends. This is for educational purposes only.
Gifts of Imperfection, by Brené Brown. Introduction. Shame Resilience 101. Here are the first 3 things that you need to know about shame. 1. We all have it. Shame is universal, and one of the most primitive human emotions that we experience. The only people who don't experience shame lack the capacity for empathy and human connection. 2. We're all afraid to talk about shame. 3. The less we talk about shame, the more control it has over our lives. Shame is basically the fear of being unlovable. It's the total opposite of owning our story and feeling worthy. In fact, the definition of shame that I developed from my research is, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Shame keeps worthiness away by convincing us that owning our stories will lead to people thinking less of us. Shame is all about fear. We're afraid that people won't like us if they know the truth about who we are, where we come from, what we believe, how much we're struggling, or, believe it or not, how wonderful we are when soaring. Sometimes it's just as hard to own our strengths as our struggles. People often want to believe that shame is reserved for the folks who have survived terrible traumas, but this is not true. Shame is something we all experience. And while it feels as if shame hides in our darkest corners, it actually tends to lurk in all of the familiar places, including appearance and body image, family, parenting, money and work, health, addiction, sex, aging, and religion. To feel shame is to be human. The stories of our struggles are difficult for everyone to own, and if we've worked hard to make sure everything looks just right on the outside, the stakes are high when it comes to truth-telling. This is why shame loves perfectionists. It's so easy to keep us quiet. In addition to the fear of disappointing people or pushing them away with our stories, we're also afraid that if we tell our stories, the weight of a single experience will collapse upon us. There is a real fear that we can be buried or defined by an experience that in reality is only a sliver of who we are. I tell a lot of these stories in my book. I thought it was just me, but the one that comes to mind now is about a woman who worked up the courage to tell her neighbor that she was a recovering alcoholic, only to have her neighbor say, "I'm not sure I'm comfortable with my kids playing at your house anymore." This brave woman told me that she pushed through her fear and said, "But they've played here for 2 years, and I've been sober for 20 years. I'm not any different than I was 10 minutes ago. Why are you?" If shame is the universal fear of being unworthy of love and belonging, and if all people have an irreducible and innate need to experience love and belonging, it's easy to see why shame is often referred to as the master emotion. We don't have to experience shame to be paralyzed by it. The fear of being perceived as unworthy is enough to force us to silence our stories. And if we all have shame, the good news is that we're all capable of developing shame resilience. Shame resilience is the ability to recognize shame, to move through it constructively, while maintaining worthiness and authenticity, and to ultimately develop more courage, compassion, and connection as a result of our experience. The first thing we need to understand about shame resilience is that the less we talk about shame, the more we have it. Shame needs 3 things to grow out of control in our lives: secrecy, silence, and judgment. When something shaming happens, and we keep it locked up, it festers and grows. It consumes us. We need to share our experience. Shame happens between people, and it heals between people. If we can find someone who has earned the right to hear our story, we need to tell it. Shame loses power when it is spoken. In this way, we need to cultivate our story, to let go of shame, and we need to develop shame resilience in order to cultivate our story. After a decade of research, I found that men and women with high levels of shame resilience share these 4 elements. 1. They understand shame and recognize what messages and expectations trigger shame for them. 2. They practice critical awareness by reality checking the messages and expectations that tell us that being imperfect means being inadequate. 3. They reach out and share their stories with people they trust. 4. They speak shame. They use the word shame they talk about how they're feeling, and they ask for what they need. When I think about the men and women in my study, who spoke about the transformative power of story, the folks who own and share their stories, I realize that they are also people who practice shame resilience. Because so much of worthiness and shame resilience is about owning our stories. I want to share one of my own shame resilience stories with you. But before I do that, I want to address two commonly asked questions about shame. I think it will help you wrap your head and heart around this tough topic. What's the difference between shame and guilt? The majority of shame researchers and clinicians agree that the difference between shame and guilt is best understood as the differences between I am bad and I did something bad. Guilt equals I did something bad. Shame equals I am bad. Shame is about who we are, and guilt is about our behaviors. We feel guilty when we hold up something we've done or failed to do against the kind of person we want to be. It's an uncomfortable feeling, but one that's helpful. When we apologize for something we've done, make amends to others, or change a behavior that we don't feel good about, guilt is most often the motivator. Guilt is just as powerful as shame, but its effect is often positive, while shame often is destructive. When we see people apologize, make amends, or replace negative behaviors with more positive ones, guilt is often the motivator, not shame. In fact, in my research, I found that shame corrodes the part of us that believes we can change and do better. Doesn't shame keep us in line? Along with many other professionals, I've come to the conclusion that shame is much more likely to lead to destructive and hurtful behaviors than it is to be the solution. Again, it is human nature to want to feel worthy of love and belonging. When we experience shame, we feel disconnected and desperate for worthiness. Full of shame, or the fear of shame, we are more likely to engage in self-destructive behaviors, and to attack or shame others. In fact, shame is related to violence, aggression, depression, addiction, eating disorders, and bullying. Children who use more shame self-talk, I am bad versus guilt self-talk, I did something bad, struggle mightily with issues of self-worth and self-loathing. Using shame to parent teaches children that they are not inherently worthy of love.